Yes, so the bouncing ball. Why is there always going to be a bouncing ball in every single fucking animation course? Because I think it's a great practice personally. We all know how it's supposed to look. We all have bounced objects. We know how gravity works because that's kind of how we've been evolved as humans. We know how these kind of things feels and looks. There isn't also a ton of keyframes involved. It's a very straightforward process. We work like chronologically, so we can focus on the quality of the movements instead of the quantity. And the visualization of the movements, as in the curves, will almost look like a bouncing movement when you animate them. So it's just really nice to do it just so you can get a grasp on how these things will work when you get into more complex movements, for example. Also, I think you end up animating a lot of bouncing objects if you do go into animation, so you might as well practice, I think. So yeah, we've opened up our first scene here. This is basically the setup that most of the scenes will have. So over here we have these set amount of objects. So these set pieces, for example, this blue one has a different model that you can swap between here in the model selector, here under the user data. If you want, you can go ahead and change the color as well. For the grid, you can increase and decrease the lines that you have here. And for the model right here, which is the pink one, you can swap between all of these different like pre-set up objects that we have selected for you. If you want to pull in your own type of objects, you can obviously do that too. You might have to break the system a bit, but if you want to just throw in one of your own designs, I would recommend just putting it right below, for example, the model right here. Let's say that you want to swap this one out. So if I just want to create a cube and just add that in there, I'll just add it as a child and then just place it where this object is. And the reason why I want to do that is because I want the material and the color to be applied to the cube as well. So, but yeah, in this course, we'll just strictly work with the models that I have prepared. If you want to add your own, obviously go ahead and do that. And there is quite a lot of things hidden under the hood of the car. In this case, we have a lot of hidden objects here. And these are hidden so you don't accidentally break the links between colors and materials and so on. So if you do decide to unhide these and unlock them, you'll be on your own basically. But if you have a original scene file saved down, then obviously you're fine. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend unlocking them unless you're more on the advanced or intermediate side. But yeah, this is basically the object that we're gonna be animating. And first thing that we'll actually go ahead and do is just add our timeline here on the left side of the screen that I had in the previous lesson. So to do that, we'll just go ahead and come up here to window. We'll go down to timeline here, the F-curve window. We'll add that and we'll just take this little hamburger icon here and just drag it over to the left-hand side of our screen right there. I'll actually want to have it on the left-hand side of the timeline as well, so we have this window expanded all the way down like that. And before we place any keyframes, it might be good to just check the project settings that you're on. So to do that, you can either hit Ctrl or Command D, or we can just come up here to Edit and select the project settings. So what I want you to check here is the frames per second setting. So obviously, in this case, you have opened up this file. We're all working in 24 frames by default in this course. If you want to change this to like 30 or even 60, you can do that. You will have a very different look to what I have. I like working in 24 or 25, and we're working in 24 in this case. So if you want to change this to a higher number, you can. But our animations won't look the same, and the frame values will be different. So it might be a bit harder to tag along. But yeah, I'll leave that up to you. Okay, so we'll go ahead and add our first keyframe then. So I'll just select the ball here. I kind of see the ball fall from this height, which is almost 300 centimeters. And we'll make sure that we have our timeline marker here set to 0, because that's where we want to begin our animation. So to place our first keyframe, we'll just come over here to the position Y, which is the up and down in my case. So I'll just hit this little diamond icon here, which means that we place a keyframe at frame 0, and we'll just move on to maybe around frame 10. Which is where I see the ball land on the floor. So that will be the next position that will keyframe. So I just drag this down, or I can just go ahead and just drag it down like this. And just to kind of see where we place the ball to make sure it doesn't intersect too much with the floor, I'll just come up here to our toggle view, and we'll just take a look here in the front view here. I'll just zoom in here with the Alt and right click. So I'll just go ahead and move this up just a bit so it doesn't float, but it doesn't intersect too much either. So around 34 centimeters. I'll just hit diamond icon there. and I'll go out again to my perspective view. So now we have our first set of movements, so we can actually just look at this. And it looks beautiful, right? So I'm using Shift F to go back to frame 0 when I'm playing, just to kind of rewatch the movements all the time. This is probably the set of keys that I use the most when animating. So now we obviously want to add the bounce up movement, because we want it to bounce up quite high, since this is a very bouncy ball. So I'll just move to frame 20 in my case. I'll move the ball up to somewhere around 220 centimeters, something like that. So it doesn't move all the way up, but it still has a lot of bounce in it. So at this point, I'll just add a keyframe at frame 20. We'll just kind of preview this again. Very nice. So with these keyframes placed, I think we can go ahead and just tweak our curves just for now, just so we don't get distracted by this awful movement and we can just get some inspiration moving on. So I'll just select our position Y here. We probably won't get our entire curve framed up. So to do that, I can just hit Command A, which selects all the keyframes, and then I'll hit S. So that will make you focus in on all of the keyframes in your selected curve. And then I'll just use the same type of navigation as in the viewfinder here. So I'll just zoom out a bit, holding Alt and my right click button like this. So the first thing that we can do is actually just add a lot more ease in on this end. So I'll just drag this keyframe out quite a bit. And same on this end, like this, because we want to have a pretty exaggerated movement since we are working with animation and a bouncing ball. So just go ahead and preview this as it is. And it looks nice in terms of the starting positions, but obviously the bounce is really weird. And that is due to the fact that it eases in and eases out at this keyframe. And a bouncing movement should just have a very sharp in and out. So to do that, we can just hold Command or Control, and I'll just pull these in. If you hold Command or Control, these tangents will stay flat. And if you don't, they'll be getting a bit tilted, and we don't want that because we want them completely flat in this case. So I'll just pull these in like that, and then we can play it again. Much better, right? Great stuff. Okay, I think we can move on. So at frame 29, I'd say, we can add our second impact. And instead of going in and adding this value here all over again, we can actually just select this impact keyframe that we have here because we're happy with that position and just hit Command or Control C. So we just hit Command V here. Perfect. And we can rewatch this. We're going to be rewatching a lot of our movements many times. And I think this feels really nice. We can move on, I think. So the next frame that we can place a keyframe at is frame 35, I'd reckon. So instead of going in and placing keyframes in the viewfinder, I like placing them within the timeline. So I almost exclusively work in the timeline when I place keyframes. And we'll do the same thing here as we did with the impact frame, as we'll take the apex keyframe at our previous apex point. I'll hit Command C and Command V at frame 35. And obviously this is a very, very tall bounce, so we don't want that. So I'll just pull it down to somewhere around like maybe, yeah, here I'd say. And we get this weird like tension here. So I'll just go ahead and hold Control or Command and just drag this tangent in a bit, so we don't overshoot this keyframe, because then you will get this weird bendy thing here. So we want this to really look like a bouncing motion. So we just play this forward and see how it looks. Nice. So without further ado, I think we can add our next impact keyframe. So I'll do that at frame 41, I think. So I'll just copy and paste this one like that. We'll play it. Nice. Yeah, this is starting to look really fun. So I'll add our next apex point. So these last few bounces will be really, really short. So I'll just go ahead and copy and paste the previous apex point. I'll just pull in the tangent here so we don't get this tension. And we just pull it down, just a tad. I mean, this is kind of where I see the bounces really get smaller. So I'll just drag it in a bit here. We'll go ahead and add the next impact at frame 47, I reckon should do. Like that. And we'll just play it back to see how it feels. Yeah. I think that looks really nice. I think we can maybe decrease the height of the first bounce. Just like that. Yeah, that's much better. And then I think we can add maybe one or two like super tiny bounces. So these are basically the type of movements that really sells the effect, I think. So at frame 39, I'll add the next apex keyframe. So I'll just copy the previous apex, just pull that tangent in a bit. decrease the height quite a bit, so just very, very small movements here. And then on frame 51, copy and paste the impact, and then we'll just do like one frame back and forth for the last one. So just copy the apex one, and we don't even need to tweak the tangents here because we don't have any frames to interpolate between here, but I'll just do that because it makes the curve look nicer. So I'll just drag this down, and then we'll copy the last impact keyframe. So now we have our bouncing movement here. So let's play this back. And then we can go ahead and deselect our ball animation here so we don't get disturbed by the motion path. Nice, I think this looks really, really great. It has some rhythm, it has some personality. You can kind of guess what type of ball this is. This is a very, bouncy plastic ball. If you would go for maybe a bowling ball, then obviously the bounces would die out much more quicker. But in this case, I think this looks great. But I think we can do more. Remember the 12 principles, the squash and stretch? I think we can add that because that's going to do a lot to the perception of the movement here. So to achieve this, we're going to use deformers. And deformers are basically pre-made tools by Cinema that allows you to alter the shape of the geometry and stuff without having to go in and manually move the points of the mesh and stuff. So they are super, super handy, both when it comes to modeling, I think, and animation. So yeah, we can find them over here. And before we create one, we'll just go ahead and expand the ball animation null here. And this is the models that we're working with. So we basically have the sphere on the top, which is a hemisphere, and the bottom here. So to add our deformer here, we'll just go ahead and click and hold on the deformers section here. We'll release on squash and stretch. So if you just go ahead and pull the factor attribute here, and we'll get some weird effects, and that is because the squash and stretch is placed at the bottom of the scene. So we'll want this to be placed in the middle of our ball animation null. So to do that, we'll just go ahead and scroll down a bit in my case and hit fit to parent. And in this case, the size is still a bit weird. If you would have a full sphere, we could pull it into the mesh here and just hit fit to parent. But since we have a hemisphere, that won't really work in this case. So I'll just undo that, and we'll manually just shift the size here. So I think the sphere is how tall? 35. So yeah, we'll just set 35 at the top and minus 35 at the bottom, like that. And if you go ahead and tweak the factor now we'll get some different results here. So this is getting very cartoony. So to kind of decrease that, I'll just decrease the expand attribute here to maybe something like 65, because that won't get these really cartoony profiles of the sphere here. So I think that's going to work really nicely. So I'll just set this back to 100, like that. And just to be organized, we'll just put the squash and stretch at the top here. So our squash and stretch will basically affect everything within this ball animation null. So if we would place it within the scene, don't do that because it might crash. Then the squash and stretch will affect everything within the scene null, which is basically everything that you see in this case. So yeah, we'll just keep the squash and stretch within our ball animation null like this. And we'll go ahead and add some keyframes. So I guess maybe at frame 4, once we start to really accelerate, that's when the ball will kind of stretch out. So I'll just go ahead and place a keyframe at frame 4, like that. And then right before the ball hits the floor, that's kind of where the ball would be at its most stretched point, right? So I'll just really pull this out to maybe something 190 in this case, I'd say. So at frame 9, I'll set our first keyframe for the squash and stretch deformer. We can actually go ahead and just drag it into our timeline, so we can see the curves of it. Just focus in on it like that. And before we tweak any curves, we'll go ahead and place some more keyframes. So we'll go ahead and shrink this down a bit. If you would like, you can keep it at 100. I will be squashing it down just a bit, and that means that our ball will now be levitating off the floor, but we'll go ahead and tweak the positions once we're happy with the squash and stretch. So I'll set this to around it's a bit too much, maybe 90. Just a tad bit of a squash, I'd say. So I'll place a keyframe there. So now we have the squash and stretching movement here at the beginning. So I'll just go ahead and play this. Nice. This is getting some fun results already. So we'll keep going, and then we'll tweak the curves once we're happy with the keyframes being placed. So at frame 11 again, we'll go ahead and stretch this out, not as far as it was previously because we'll lose the momentum a bit since it bounced. So I'll place a keyframe at frame 11 for 162, like that. And then at the apex, which is frame 20, I believe, I'll just set a keyframe at 100, because that's kind of when the ball loses its momentum upwards, naturally, then it wouldn't stretch any longer. So I'll just hit a keyframe for 100 there, like that. Boink. Great. And then it accelerates down again. So right before the impact, which is frame 28 in my case, we'll drag it up to maybe somewhere around like 150. So it keeps losing momentum the more it bounces, like that. Great. And then we have the impact point at frame 29. So then we'll want to squash it down a bit. So maybe at like 90. Boink, like that. And then at frame 30, we'll have acceleration upwards again. We'll maybe set it to 140 in this case, or 136. Let's increase it just a bit, like that. And then the ball will reach its apex at frame 35, like that. Yeah, so we'll set that to 100 again. Oops, not 10, 100, thank you. Set a keyframe, move along. And then right before the impact at frame 40, we'll set it to maybe 140 again, something like that. And then at the impact, let's go with 90 again. I think that's nice. Boink. And then maybe like 110, like that. Boink. Apex, 100, like that. Keep going before the impact here. I think this will be the last stretching that we'll do. So frame 47 is the impact. So at frame 46, we'll set it to like just a slight stretch, or maybe like 110. Yeah, let's do that. Boink, and then 100. Or let's squash it maybe to like 95. And then at the apex here for the last bounce, I think that's when it will get back to 100. And then it won't be squashing and stretching any longer, because these bounces are so tiny, so it wouldn't really affect the shape of the ball, I'd say. So with all these keyframes placed, let's go ahead and view the animation. So just go back to frame 0, we'll play it back. So this looks really, really great already, I think. But we can obviously perfect it by tweaking our curves, because I think especially like when it starts to go down a bit, it stretches a bit too fast in these scenarios. So when it bounces up like this, we want the stretching to like take a bit longer. So I'll just go into our squash and stretch null here. We'll take a look at what keyframes that will be. So yeah, you can basically see which are the apex keyframes here. So we have this kind of pattern that we can follow. So I'll just extend these quite a bit like this and do the same thing over here. Can't really do too much on this one, but yeah, I'll just extend this one quite a bit. So we're kind of changing how fast we get into the stretched out position and so on. So with these kind of tangents edited, and we'll do it on the first one as well, like that. We can now go ahead and play our animation. Great. That looks really nice, I think. So I really like this look, but if you want to have a bit more of a fluid, like squashing and stretching, a super easy thing to do could be to offset this keyframe. So the keyframe where the ball goes back to being not stretched to then accelerate into the stretching position again. If we like offset this to like more towards the impact keyframe of the next position, that will basically kind of delay the ball going back to its like non-stretched state. So this will kind of create this fluidity in the stretching, which could be really interesting if you're looking to create that kind of effect. So let's just see what that did. Yeah, I think that looks really cool. So I'll keep that, and I'll do it to the next keyframe as well, and just a tad bit on the next apex keyframe. So we can just watch these back. That looks really cool, I think. It feels like almost like a water balloon or something. So yeah, since we have kind of messed up our ball touching the floor at the impact keyframes by squashing it down, we'll just need to readjust that in our position Y. So I'll just come into my ball animation, position Y, Command A and S to focus in. And to move between keyframes, so you don't have to just manually scroll between the keys, you can hit Control or Command F and G. So Command F is going to the previous keyframe and Command G is going to the next keyframe. So I'll just go to the impact keyframe here. We'll hop into our front view just so we can view this precisely. So I'll just select this keyframe, hold shift and just drag it down a bit. So we can see the value of the keyframe here. So at 31.5, we can actually go ahead and select this value. So we'll hit Command or Control C, select that, go to our next impact keyframe. I believe this is the same like squashing position. So I'll just go ahead and copy that in. Great. So for the next impact keyframe, we'll just select that and we'll paste in the same value here. That will work. Great. And then for these ones, I don't think they are squashed down as much. I don't think we need to put it at the exact same value, but maybe something like this. So I just selected all the three keyframes, held shift and pulled them down like that. And now I think it actually touches the ground on all of the cases. Oops, not here. Let's move these up, pull them down a bit too far. So like that. Great. So we can hop out to our perspective view. So instead of actually clicking here, you can hit your scroll wheel if you're on a mouse that has a scroll wheel. So I usually do that a lot. So I just hit scroll wheel, like that. So if you, the window that you hover over, once you hit the scroll wheel again, that's the window that you're going to end up in. So I just hop back to the perspective view and then we can preview the animation again. Great. That looks really cool, I think. So to kind of give this animation some more dynamic movements, I think we can add like a spin to the ball. Like it doesn't really make sense physically, but we're not really dealing with accurate physics in this case, I think. So since we have our squash and stretch within this ball animation null here, if we were to, for example, add like a spin here, so I'll just go into our coordinates here and I tweak the rotation B here. You can see that we're also spinning the squash and stretch, which is not what we want. We want the squash and stretch to move individually from the spinning. So to move around that, we can just create a new null within our ball animation null here. So I'll just go ahead and create the new null, add a null right there. We'll make sure that our null is placed at the 0 position of our ball animation null. This is really, really important. So I'll set the Y position to 0. Like that, so it ends up at the center. And we can go ahead and double click this and we'll call it the spin ball. Makes sense. And next up, we'll just take both of our spheres and pull them into the spin ball null. And now if we were to spin this null instead of the ball animation null, which doesn't have the squash and stretch within it, so the squash and stretch and the spin ball null are in the same hierarchy, this won't affect the squash and stretch. So the squash and stretch will still be moving vertically. So I'll just go ahead and rotate this so you can see what this means. So we basically move all of the sphere without spinning the squash and stretch. So exactly what we want. So I think we can place our first spin keyframe at the impact point here, at the first impact. So I believe it's the rotation B in my case. So I'll just hit the diamond button here, just add a keyframe. We'll move along to maybe like frame 30 or 27, I think could work. And we're going to spin it 360 degrees. So I just type that in, 360. We'll hit the keyframe again. We just view this. Lovely. Great. So we'll want to tweak the curves in this case again. We'll want a really like dynamic and nice looking spin here. So I'll just select our spin ball here, hit Command A and S to focus in on it. And we can have both of these keyframes selected. And if we hold Control or Command, you can pull them both out straight at the same time like that. So that's really handy. So now we have a really nice and even looking curve here. So with these changes made, we can go ahead and preview it. I'll just deselect the ball so we don't see the UI here. Nice. I reckon we can decrease the ease in and ease out. It gets a bit too extreme maybe, so I'll just select both of them. Just pull these back a bit. Like that. Really good. I do think we get a bit of an awkward shape around here. So I think that we can maybe tweak the curves of our squash and stretch here. So what could help this is actually accelerating out of this value into this value a bit more. So if we pull this tangent here, we'll also be pulling the tangent on the right hand side. And sometimes you might not want to do that. In this case, it doesn't really matter since there is a keyframe on this side. But if you want to break them, as in just move this tangent, we can hit Shift. And that will kind of break this tangent away from this one. Now, we still want to move it straight outwards. We don't want it to angle and kind of create this awkward curve that we have here. So we still want it to be straight. So I'll just undo that. And then if you hold Control or Command and Shift at the same time, you'll break it but move it in a straight line, which is exactly what I want in this case. So I'll just kind of move it out somewhere around here. I'll maybe decrease the tangents on this side as well, so like that. And now we can play it back. Great. Maybe we can even move this keyframe in a bit. It doesn't really need to be that delayed. Perfect. Now I think we have a really nice looking animation. I just pull these tangents in so we don't have these tension points here like that. We don't want the tangents to move too far beyond the next keyframe. So like that. Perfect. That was really good, I think. So if you want to render this one out immediately, we have a separate lesson in the render section on which camera to use, to what render settings and so on. It's very straightforward. So if you know Cinema 4D, then yeah, just feel free to do whatever you like. But we kind of cover how to rotate the HDRI and change up the lighting a bit. So yeah, if you want to hop onto that lesson before you get into the next workshop, feel free to do so. So yeah, now we have a bouncing ball with some rhythm and personality. And I hope you thought that it was a really good and fun exercise. I think it's great to start here. But yeah, in the next one, we'll talk about maneuvering multiple axes. It will be a bit more complex. And we'll also show how to easily make them loop and understand loops. So yeah, I'll see you over in that one.